And basically, these are a group of technical proficiency workshops that are probably aimed at coaches that are working with children, with youth, and possibly even adults. But I probably would emphasize that a lot of the technical proficiency work is done in the earlier age groups. And I know that's one of the questions that's been asked. So I happen to see some of the questions that have come in about this specific webinar, about when should you be coaching technical proficiency or when does it stop. I would imagine that, the likes of the top coaches at adult level are not spending a lot of time on technical proficiency, let's be honest. At that stage, they're looking at probably setups, strategies of other things. So I would say that possibly at the earlier years, this is the main focus, but we'll go to that as we go through. So just what we're going to deal with tonight is we're going to look very briefly at what our coaching philosophy should be. Some of these ideas are probably my own, and maybe they're not everybody's ideas, but as maybe we've mentioned in the past, that nobody has really written the Bible in coaching, but I think we should have a good coaching philosophy around skill development. I think coaches should have an idea of the coaching points, and I fully appreciate that parents getting involved for the first time with their children at underage level may not know that, and that might sound a bit daunting for them. But I think a coach should make it their business to know the key coaching points of the skills, and a lot of it is around head, hands, and feet. Where the head is in terms of eyes and the ball, where the hands are in relation to the ball, and what is your stance and what is your foot and your stance look like. Other key issue is knowing when to intervene, coachable moments. Just because you know the key coaching points, you don't have to be intervening and butting into training sessions and spoiling the flow of training sessions too regularly. Unless it's a fatal flaw or it's something that is a key thing that you need to fix, I don't think sessions should be stopped. I suppose in the ideal world, in any given training session, you should have at least two people, one keeping the session going, keeping the tempo of the session going for the greater good of the group, and maybe someone who can bring a player out and spot and fix and work with them on a one-to-one or an individual basis. In the ideal world, that is possibly the proper way to do it. So knowing when to intervene, and coachable moments are not just things that we have to spot and fix. Coachable moments can be things when we have to praise and say, well done, or that was brilliant. And positive coaching has an impact far greater than we ever could think. So kicking that we're going to look at tonight. So there's three key things we're going to look at tonight. We're going to look at the punt pass, which seems to be the pass of choice. If you go into the GA website, you'll see the punt up as one of the key ones. I would argue that the punt is not actually the foot pass of choice anymore, but I'll look at that as we go through this presentation. We'll also look at the hook, and we'll look at the swerve outside of the boot, and we'll look at which I feel is becoming the default kick now, very much at the top level and definitely at club level too, is the inside of the foot, where you're using a lot of cushion, you're using a lot of control, and you're looking to find players in pockets of space, which is a bit tighter than maybe they would have been in a number of years ago. But we'll deal with that as we go through. So spotting best practice and fixing faults and flaws. So being able to praise, but also being able to intervene. So coaching philosophy, we said we'd just look at this, and I'm not going to go into any great depth, but I picked up a comment on Twitter not so long ago. I think somebody said, if I hear one more coach saying that every session has to be fun, I'll eat my hat. So obviously that particular person was getting a bit pissed off with all of this idea that every session has to be fun. But I would argue that at the younger age groups, if you want to catch the imagination of young players, whether female or male, then you must make it an enjoyable. If you want to catch the imagination, you must make it an enjoyable experience. That doesn't mean that winning doesn't matter. Everybody wants to win, and I think younger children will ask you at the end of every game, what was the score, who won? And of course, there's a competitive element in all of us, but one shouldn't be to the detriment of the other, particularly at the younger age groups. We want to be developing players for them to play at adult level, not to win by Friday or win the next under 14 FILA or whatever. So I think the key thing there is that when winning is kept in perspective, there is room for fun in the pursuit of victory. So skill development, where does it start? Well, again, this is not my remit for tonight, but I think you can't talk about technical proficiency unless you mention the fundamentals. If children don't develop the ABCs, agility, balance, and coordination, you're going to struggle to build the sports-specific skills. So for me, those are the foundation stones, and we would generally see the wonderful opportunity for that probably from at key stage 1, probably from the age of 3, 4, right up to 7, which is roughly, I would say, probably for the 6 counties or for the north up here from P1 up to P4. So building the fundamental skills upon which then you can build the sport-specific skills. And, you know, a lot of people have moved away recently, or the experts have said there's no such thing as wonders of opportunity, but I personally would disagree with that. I think there's absolutely wonders of opportunity. And that age between 3 to 7 or thereabouts, it's not, I mean, some people develop at different rates than others, but that in general is a key area for building the fundamental skills. And then after that, to build the sport-specific skills on top of that. So development of good movement skills is essential for the execution of sport-specific skills. The fundamental movement skills are the foundation for the sport-specific skills. So there's, generally speaking, 3 phases of skill development. And as I said, there's no particular pathway. Every player is different. But in general, early on, there's lots of errors. And the children or the young players depend to a large extent on the coach for instruction and direction. So it is very much coach-driven and coach-led. Intermediate level, where they're starting to achieve some of the sport-specific skills, they have a basic level of competence. They can perform the skill, even if it's still a little bit awkward for them, but they're a little bit better at it, they're a bit faster. It's appropriately structured, and there's nothing wrong, despite what a lot of people would say, there's nothing wrong about having some drills in and around that stage of development. You know, we tend to, in the GAA and in sport generally, go from one extreme to the other. 1 minute it's all drills, the next minute it's all games, but there's room and place for all of these things, all things in moderation and at the right place at the right time. And obviously then after intermediate, the skill becomes automatic in the brain. Then you're really moving on to decision making. So they know they're going to receive the ball. In their mind's eye, they know how to perform the technical skills, and then the decision making is what is key. And obviously players that have great technical proficiency and have good first touch and good technical skills are going to have more time to make good decisions. So the technical skills are an essential piece in the performance jigsaw. So just a little bit around skill development and coaching. So I think we would generally agree the sports skills are best taught when the coach knows the observable components of the skill. That they just know to break the skill down. You don't have to have all the right language, and you can call it, you can put names and specific elements of the skill that works for you or works for the people that you're coaching, but that you know how to break the skill down. That you're able to spot coachable moments. And by coachable moments, I don't mean all faults and failings or errors. I mean moments of greatness and brilliance, fix and praise. I have a feeling, I have this thing in my head that, unless something is a fatal flaw, you don't always have to be in fixing and changing stuff and, I suppose having almost a brain freeze with your players because you're giving them too much information. So you give feedback at the appropriate time. You instruct how to modify the bits that need correction. And very often this, I think, needs to be done on a one-to-one basis if someone has a fatal flaw that needs to be corrected, and that you're able to break down into the components. But don't forget to let them play. Don't be jumping in and out and stopping that ability to let them play. So different approaches. Again, I think it'd be remiss of us to talk about tactical proficiency if we don't mention a little bit about this, but there's these approaches and to the game, how it should be coached. Some of you may have heard of whole, part, whole, and wonder what in the God does that mean. But whole, part, whole basically means you start with the game, you observe where the issues are or what the areas of deficiency are, and you may go into a drill to correct that deficiency, whether it be kicking, whether it be hand passing, whether it be pickup or whatever, and then you go back into the game then to look for improvement. So whole, part, whole is basically game, drill, game. Part, whole, part, on the other hand, is where you may start with a drill or an activity. You go into the game and you finish with a drill or an activity. Personally, for me, I wouldn't get too tied up about either of them, but whole, part, whole would tend to be something that I would think may work better. So players pass through various stages of acquiring skills, all at different stages. Some move on a lot faster than others, but you must remember in all of this that technical proficiency is only one piece in the overall performance jigsaw. Obviously things like attitude, open mindsets, all of those things are also, and coachability are also crucial. So the time taken to master the skills will depend on the individual's ability, everybody being different, the quality of the coach, how good you are, and I don't mean just how good you are in terms of technical ability. Give me a coach anytime who can create a great learning environment, an enjoyable environment, over someone who knows all the technical stuff. Obviously, ideally, you'd want both, but that coach who could create an unforgettable experience is hard to beat. And the skills should always progress from simple to complex. Now, again, just for, I'm aware that a lot of people in the audience may be beginner coaches, there may be people who are assisting, they may be getting involved with their kids at underage level, or they may be very experienced coaches. But always good to have a model in your head of how you structure a session, how you structure maybe introducing the skills. So the idea model is very simple. The I is for introduce. So the coach will introduce the skill and put it in context. For example, if it's the high catch, you might refer to some role model in the club or in your county who's a great fielder of the ball and give it context, catch the imagination. Then demonstrate, so the coach will demonstrate the skill, taking your time to do it correctly, maybe from a number of different angles. And if you don't feel competent in doing that, there's always maybe a child or a player who is only too keen to do that for you. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Execute the skill. So in advance, you'd have obviously arrived in time and prepared well. The coach will execute the skill in the form of a drill or activity with at least one progression. So you've set up something where they'll move into something that's enjoyable, but that hits the point in terms of the skill that you're trying to coach. And at the end, then attend. Just a coach will attend, review, and provide feedback. And it's a nice wee model to remember, particularly if you're starting off. So just a bit of advice. So if you're doing a session, have a purpose. What are you trying to achieve from a drill or activity? What is it you're trying to achieve? What is your outcome? And did it achieve that? And do you check for learning at the end of the session to find out were you successful? So that you're giving yourself feedback as well of how you can improve. So is it achieving this? Do the players understand what you're trying to achieve? Do they know what they're trying to achieve? And you make it interesting. How do you adjust the activity to make it harder or easier? For example, if you're not getting any positive outcomes from a session, maybe you've made it too difficult and you have to make it easier. And one way maybe to remember that is the stepper model. Now, I don't want to be giving you too many acronyms here, but stepper model is things that you might change in order to make a drill or an activity easier or more difficult. Is space, S for space, T for time. So in terms of space, you might make the area bigger or smaller. In terms of time, less time on the ball or 3 seconds on the ball, or first to 10 or whatever. Equipment, you might change the equipment you're using. You might change the number of players that's involved in that activity, and you might change the rules. The rules could be one touch. Rules could be, you can't move the ball backwards or whatever. It depends on what you're trying to achieve from that drill. So good to remember those two things, the idea model and the stepper model. So anyway, back to the point. We said tonight that we would talk about kicking and where we are and how kicking has evolved, I suppose, in our games over the last number of years. Now, I'll just mention at the beginning here, this slide is not referenced. So someone could check these two All-Ireland finals and find that these figures are not exactly right. But I could probably guarantee that the overall picture is there or thereabouts. So basically, if you look at those two contrasting sort of stats from two different All-Ireland finals in 2009 and 2016, there is no question whatsoever that kicking is less prevalent in 2016 than it was in 2009. However, the success rate and the successful execution of those passes increased substantially. Now, people might well argue, well, there's less risk involved in the kicking, a lot more lateral kicking, a lot more short kicking. That could well be, but it still can't be ignored that the success rate is quite a bit higher. And the other big issue here that I mentioned is that the prevalence of the punt kick from 54 in 2009 to 14 in 2016 has diminished quite a bit. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't practice the punt kick. I think it's our duty as coaches to provide players with all the tools in the toolbox so that on a given day they have them, they can reach in that moment of decision making for whatever is the best option at the time. But I would argue that inside of the boot, the inside of the boot was becoming a very prevalent pass because it's more cushioned, it's more controlled, it works better in small spaces. Inside forwards have less space, so those small wee pockets of space, you have to control your pass better. Now, I hope these videos work. Obviously, it depends a lot on what sort of Wi-Fi reception you have, and we have no control over that. But I'm going to just play a bit of this, not all of it, but just to give you an idea. I think this is a clip from the 2016 All-Ireland final. Just bear with me. So you'll note that there's a variety of passes in that particular series of clips. Some with the outside of the boot, some with the inside, a few punt passes, a few hook scores for points. And you'll also note probably there's a lot of lateral passes, a lot of outside of the boot passes from one side of the field to the other. Obviously, players are trying to find a weakness in the sort of blanket defence or that defensive setup that either Dublin or Mayo had at specific times in that game. So, that's why possibly there's a lot of the passing is not as penetrating and is quite a bit more lateral. So hopefully you're still with me. I'm going to show you a clip here of the punt pass being executed by an elite player. I'm going to turn the volume down. Hopefully you've been able to pick up on the volume. But the volume's going to be down in this, and I want you to text in. Mickey will be able to receive, Michael Glover will be able to receive these texts. I want you to text in. There should be 4 key coaching points. If you can get one of them, brilliant. If you can get 2 of them, excellent. If you can get all of them, fantastic. So I'm just going to play this. Okay, so that was the punt pass, used for kicking for distance, used for putting forwards into play, used sometimes for scoring, but used probably less, as we pointed out earlier on in one of the slides. So I'm giving you a few seconds there to text, use your text box. You should have a text box somewhere, hopefully in your screen, depending on what device you're using. So just text in any one of 4 key coaching points. And I'll just play this again with the volume up. Okay, so hopefully you're able to identify a few of the key coaching points. I'm now going to show you some of the common errors that are normally what happen when executing or when coaching someone to kick the ball. To just text in, if you don't mind, any of the common errors, just one common error that will happen here. So, okay, that is a number of options for spot and fix. So there's a lot of the typical things that will happen when you're trying to coach this skill. So I'm going to use this with the volume up. Always think about head, hands, and feet, where the head is, where the hands are in relation to the ball, and where the feet are in terms of stance. So I'm going to turn the volume up here. Okay, I've been told here that some people are struggling just with sound. So I just move on. Okay, so just in the punt kick, right? So the three key coaching points that I'm hoping that you would pick up on were number one, hold the ball firmly in both hands, release the ball onto the hand at the kicking side, head down, eyes on the ball. So get that ingrained in your mind. So hold the ball firmly in both hands, release the ball onto the hand at the kicking side, head down, eyes on the ball. Step forward with a non-kicking foot. Drop the ball onto the foot. So step forward. That is one of the key issues that a lot of players don't do, particularly when you're starting off with young kids. They're very often standing static and they don't move in with a non-kicking foot because it's a movement game. So we're always moving into the kick. We're always moving into the hand pass. We're always moving through all of the technical skills we do. So drop the ball onto the foot. Kick the ball with the instep of the foot. And that is really, we talk about the hard foot or the laces. So it's important because when we talk later on about using the inside of the foot, it's a slightly different position on the foot. And lastly, keep the toes pointed, follow through in the direction of the target. Okay, the common errors very often are lifting the head too early, dropping the ball from the opposite hand, so changing hands, going from left to right or right to left, and not keeping the toes pointed down. Key thing for young kids when they're starting off this skill is, I'm just going to go back to show you a couple of DVDs here, where some people have asked in their questions, what do we do in terms of a kid starting off? So they've just completed the fundamental skills. They're able to do the ABCs. They're starting to acquire or look to acquire some of the sport-specific skills. To kick a ball airborne is quite a difficult task. How do we start off? Well, I suggest you start off by doing the like of this. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with having the ball on the ground. I would be saying if you're working in pairs and you step back, you address the ball, you strike the ball with the inside of the left or right foot, you trap, the receiver traps the ball with one foot and strikes with the other. Another question that is coming in is, when is the best time to work on bilateral skills? This is the best time to work on bilateral skills. Before they even know whether they have a dominant foot or not, work early on in the ground stage at using both foots, trapping with one, striking with the other, time about, change it, then trap with the other foot, strike with the other. Because once it becomes strange, once it becomes difficult in their mind, that means there's a pathway in the brain that is already wants to kick with the right or alternatively the left. So ground striking, addressing the ball is a good stage. So even the physical literacy stage, you can have them going round cones with the ball on the ground, getting their foot on top of the ball, getting the feel of the ball underneath their foot and their toes, and just getting familiar with the feel of the ball. Semi-airborne. So I'm going to play that one again. Now we're working semi-airborne. So initially they're able to operate the ball on the ground, striking, trapping on the ground. So you're getting them to go semi-airborne. Get them to bounce the ball 2 or 3 times, just getting the feel of the ball. They don't have to bring the ball up and bounce it down hard, just nice and soft, bouncing the ball on the ground. Maybe on the 3rd or 4th bounce, they will strike the ball on the half volley. Working on partners, the other person receiving that ball, and obviously you're working on how to receive it, the body catch and all the rest. bouncing again 2 or 3 times with the partner, and striking it again, using again left and right foot. So semi-airborne is at that stage, and obviously then we're moving into what we would regard as airborne. So that airborne strike obviously is with the inside of the foot. So that's the what I talked about earlier on about potentially being the foot pass of choice, where you're actually lifting the leg out a little bit, you're turning the foot out, so it's not so much the laces or the hard foot, it's more cushioned and it's softer. But we'll talk about that particular pass later on. I'm going to show you. Unfortunately, I don't think you're actually picking up the volume too well on these, so I'm going to show you a coaching exercise by Philip Kerr, where he's working on a specific common error on the foot pass. And I want you, I'd like you all actually to text in what you think that common error is, because this is actually very good exhibition or example of good coaching practice. Okay, well, again, I am aware at this stage that a lot of people are struggling a little bit with getting the volume, but that doesn't matter from the point of view of these particular videos. So some of you may have guessed that what Philip Kerr has spotted with the young kids that just been coaching and this coaching clinic that's running is that they're not stepping forward and they're not kicking foot. And that is probably the most common error when you're coaching this. A lot of people are trying to balance like you're in a tightrope on one foot and kicking with the other. It's stepping forward on the non-kicking foot and literally moving through the kick. So that is what Philip was actually doing there at that time. So just moving around here a wee bit, so bear with me. Okay, so we'll just move on. Okay, so we mentioned the punt kick, we moved that. So the 5 stages of passing. This will actually probably answer some of the questions that were answered or were asked that you sent through. So I want you to think about these 5 stages of passing. The sooner you move on from a static sender and a static receiver, so imagine you're working with young children, they're working in pairs. We all know that it's a mobile game. The game is very much a movement game, that everything is movement, it's hectic, and never in a game situation will you get a static sender and a static receiver. Although we know to start with there's nothing wrong with that. So number one, 5 stages of passing, the number one stage is where the sender is static and the receiver, and they're just moving the ball either on the ground or semi-airborne or airborne between each other. Second stage is where the sender passes and moves to a new piece of ground or a free piece of ground. That means he has to readjust, he has to scan, and the receiver who has just received the ball has to readjust and scan to pass. So that's the start of movement in the process of 5 stages of passing. The third stage is where the sender moves with the ball. In other words, the fella or the player who has the ball travels with the ball, readjusts his position, scans and passes. And as soon as that receiver receives the ball, they travel with the ball, readjusts, scans and passes. And number 4, This stage, the sender is static, but he is moving the ball either with a hand pass or a foot pass or whatever the skill you're coaching is to a moving receiver. So he's having to think about space, about moving the ball in front of the player, of where the player might be. The danger with number one is it's a bit like hitting the bullseye in the dartboard. You have to be very accurate all the time. In the game, when the game is fluid, when it's moving, everything is moving. So it's like hitting half the dartboard or a third of the dartboard or a quarter of the dartboard. So you're hitting the space, not the face. Okay. And just for number five there, as you can see, both the sender and the receiver are moving. So it's all moving. It's total football. It's constantly readjusting, constantly scanning. The receiver is equally as important as the sender. So just think about that phrase, hit the space, not the face. I'm sure it's one you've heard, but the sooner you move on from the static to static, the better. Okay, so just moving on. Right, so we're moving from the punt pass to the hook kick. Now, the hook kick again is used for kicking for scores out of the hands or in play or from play. It may be used at times for getting loft onto the ball to get it over the top of a player if they're approaching you, although I may not recommend that that's a great idea all the time. Or it might be used in the last 2-3 minutes of a game when you need, maybe you're looking for a goal, you're 2 points behind or you're a point behind and you're looking for a ball dropped into the square. So you might be looking for that type of kick. So I'm just going to show you again an elite player doing it, and I would like you, again, a lot of the coaching points will be very, very similar to the punt pass, but there's going to be 1 or 2 key differences, and I want to see if you can text me in those 1 or 2 key differences. So hopefully you picked up and two of the key. Now we'll come to the key coaching points for that just in the next slide or so, but I just want you to think about how that difference. We know that probably to start off with, it's the same eyes the ball, 2 hands on the ball, moving the ball onto the hand on the same side as the kicking foot, dropping the ball, stepping forward on the non-kicking foot, rolling the ball off the shelf of the hand onto the kicking foot. But there are 2 key differences, and I want to see if you can spot those. I'm going to look here at a number to spot the common errors. So if you just have a look at this video. So in each of these clips, what do you think the player in green is doing incorrectly? So for each error that the player in green is doing, you'll see the elite player then correcting that error. So what are those errors? You'll see here. So what is that? That's the second potential common error. And here's the elite player actually correcting it. Okay, as I said, I am aware the volume is not working these, but that doesn't really matter from the point of view of this. So really what I'm looking for here is the difference between the elite player and the common errors that are being executed by the player in the green top. And we'll go through that then in the following slide. And just to see somebody, probably a kid or a youth or a young child doing this skill, executing this skill. In actual fact, this is very, very good. Getting a lot of the skills, arm out for balance, stepping forward, same hand, same foot, dropping the ball low off the shelf. That little swivel round and kicking and facing in the same direction as where you want the ball to go. Starting off with the shoulder pointed to the target. Actually, an excellent execution of that skill. Okay, so hopefully you got most of these. So again, for the hook kick is a kicking technique used in Gaelic football, predominantly used to kick for a score. It is also used to pass to a teammate at an angle or the player in possession. Can be used in other situations as well. So number one, you hold the ball with both hands, pointing your shoulder towards the target. Okay, the key thing there is pointing the shoulder towards the target. Release the ball onto the hand at the kicking side, step forward with the non-kicking foot as you do on nearly all of these kicking skills. Drop ball onto the kicking foot, strike the ball with the inside of the boot, which is slightly different from the punt pass. The punt pass is like, the firing pin in the gun, straight down the bar, no deviation from side to side. This kick is slightly different in that you're dropping the ball onto the inside of the foot and you follow through in the direction of the target with the toe pointing upwards rather than the toe pointing down. Okay. Common errors are, and the guy in the green that we just looked at, there was 3 common errors that you could have picked out here. Not pointing. He started off, he wasn't pointing the shoulder at the target. Dropping the ball with the opposite hand, so he's changing hands, he's dropping from right to left or left to right, and lifting the head too early. And you'll note probably an image that I would have in my mind is possibly a one point that Peter Canavan scored maybe in All-Ireland semi-final where his execution was so good, the ball was still travelling over the bar, but he was completely head down on the ball, trusting that if he followed the technique correctly, that the rest would take care of itself. So the swerve kick. So the third kick that we're going to look at tonight is a swerve kick, slightly different. Okay, so the swerve kick in practice, again, I want you to look for the differences. So a lot of the skills, a lot of the coaching points are similar, but there are a number of key differences from the punt kick and indeed from the hook kick. Now, the swerve kick is used, and you can see in the clip that we saw at the very beginning from the Dublin Mayo game that it is used quite a bit. So it's used for kicking for scores or for possession. That lateral pass across the width of the field, very often to probe and find the weakness in the blanket, you'll find that outside of the boot is used quite a bit. This time we're kicking across the body. The first time we're actually kicking across the body, striking the ball with the outside of the foot, just above the wee toes, we would call it. This gives the ball spin, so it's kicking across the body. And for the first time, we use this imagery of breaking the glass. In the punt, you can imagine there's a pane of glass between your legs, and the punt kick, that glass will never break. Okay, but in the swerve pass, yes, it will, because we're actually kicking across the body. So I want you just to observe this particular one. Okay, and again, just looking at someone at underage level, maybe making a few mistakes. So this is a common error that I would like you just to see. What is this young fella here doing wrong? What would you correct if you were a coach here? How would you correct this fault? And what is that fault? So a lot of what with this lad, I think this is Felix, actually, this is Mickey's lad. Well, a lot of what he done there is absolutely excellent. Probably didn't get the other arm out for balance and possibly didn't get enough twirl on the ball or swerve on the ball by kicking across the body. But everything else was good. Same hand, same foot, stepping forward into the kick and all of that. Okay. So last one, okay, the inside of the foot. This what we talked about is becoming one of the most popular kicks, and we're just looking at a number of young fellas here doing this. So again, Mickey's two cubs, and thanks to Mickey for actually doing this for us. This is sometimes known as a cushion pass. This skill has become the pass of choice in Gaelic football. That's my opinion. I suppose maybe that will change. Maybe with the inside mark, maybe the punt will come back in more. But I still think this is a better pass for finding angles, for hitting the space, not the face, as we talked about. Better control, better accuracy, more cushion, and can definitely be used in tighter spaces. So it probably is a wee lift of the ball up. I wouldn't necessarily say that you drop the ball down low, but other than that, that was excellent. Okay, so the key here is you're opening up your foot a bit, and you're actually from your hip down, you're opening up, you're actually hinging your leg out just a little bit to cushion that pass. Now, in the heat of the game, in the heat of the battle, this may not be happen just exactly like that, but you'll definitely get your foot wrapped around that ball to give it greater accuracy, greater cushion. Again, all the same coaching points. Two hands on the ball, eyes on the ball, moving the ball onto the same hand on that foot that you're going to kick with. Dropping the ball low from the shelf down onto the foot, stepping forward, eyes on the ball, follow through. So that's good. Lots of control. Again, as we mentioned earlier on, that's static to static. You'd want to start operating the 5 stages of passing where you're starting to get movement into it. You'd start to think about hitting space and also players rescanning and all of that. And just to see that pass done at a bit of pace, so we're working a wee bit of pace into it. And really, you know what, that's the way that's in reality. And the sooner you're doing that in a game situation or semi-game situation, the better, where you're really getting movement. As we mentioned earlier, the quicker you move on from static, the better. So that's done at full movement. There's still that element of control. Okay, so just going to show you one last video here, and then it's going to be questions. This is just okay. So this is a series of drills, activities, games that we have set up for kick passing. So there's a wide variety here of kick passing. As I said, it's our responsibility as coaches to give them all the tools in the toolbox to practice the swerve, to practice the instep, to practice the punt, to practice the hook. Now, we didn't talk tonight about kicking off the ground or penalty kicks. That's probably for another webinar potentially. But you can see some of these are using the swerve, some of them using the instep. But if I was setting up maybe a drill or an activity like this, I would give them maybe 1 minute or 30 seconds or whatever, purely on swerve, same on the hook, the same on the punt, and all of the rest. But there are 8. We have a series of these, and we can share this resource with you, where there's 5 what we would regard as drill activities, and another 4 of games which are focusing solely on improving the kick pass. So that is a resource we have, and that we're happy to share with you. Okay. So takeaway messages, right? Apologies first of all, maybe the volume didn't work on all of those, but I talked through most of them, and the volume isn't that important at the end of the day. So hopefully you all got a fair feel of what we're trying to get across. The importance of technical proficiency, first touch, the full menu of skills. So, you know, they're like all, as we said, we mentioned the phrase tools in the toolbox. It's our job as coaches from a technical proficiency point of view to give them all the tools in the toolbox so that when they have tight and tough decisions to make in the heat of battle, they will at least have that array of skills that they can choose from. Okay, I still believe that there's wonders of opportunity, even though some people are saying they're not. People can learn at different stages, we all know that, but that fundamental stage of key stage 1, as we refer to it in the school or the curriculum classes, from 4 to 7, that is the foundation stones. The learn to train stage, from 8 to 12, is where I feel a lot of technical proficiency is embedded. There are not that many people with under 14, under 16 teams spending lots and loads of time on technical proficiency. They're playing games, yes, they're getting into game scenarios, and they're just hoping that the technical skills develop from those early years. Definitely at senior level, no one, Mickey Moran or Conal Laverty or none of these top coaches are spending a half an hour doing technical work. So this is when our window of opportunity, I think, for when we should be doing these. Simplify the message, let them play. Don't be intervening, don't be spotting fixing all the time. Unless it's a fatal flaw, you don't have to be jumping in. There's lots of errors in the way to perfection. We've had the imagery of a child learning to walk or a child learning to stand, that they make lots of errors, they fall down, they might make 400 attempts before they can walk properly. None of them are mistakes. It's all part of the process. So unless it's a fatal flaw, let them develop. Plenty of positive feedback. If it's not broke, you don't have to fix it. Some people say, listen, I saw someone stolen from left to right and it looks terrible, I've got to change that fella. You know, you might give them a brain freeze if you try to give them too much technical information. If it's working and they're getting away with it and it's not a fatal flaw, then, you know, you don't have to be jumping in and out. Errors are part of the learning process. So I mentioned the thing about a child walking or standing. Knowledge is no substitute for the ability to create a learning environment. So yes, you know, to know the coaching points, to know all the technical stuff is fantastic, but it's just no substitute for a coach that can create an environment where people just say, that is the best experience ever I had, I want to be back. But knowledge will help you create that as well. And the last thing, children, youth, adults, they might not remember what you said, but they will always remember how you made them feel. They might not remember all the technical tips and all the jargon, but remember how they felt about that training session and that particular experience. So there's some resources. This webinar will be shared with everybody who were on tonight at least, and maybe anybody who signed up. I'm not so sure how that works, but you will have access to this very soon. Those are some of the resources you can access. We have other resources that if you want to get in contact with Tony Scullion or myself, that we can help you out with. Listen, just to thank everybody. I know we had good numbers tonight. I hope it worked for you to some extent. I hope you picked up something from it. As I said, it's not an exact science, and no one has written the Bible in coaching, and we all have our own views on it, which is probably formed by our own experiences. So hopefully you found it helpful. And if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to take a few before we finish.
Thanks, Roger. There was a few questions put in, so just starting off, there's 5 questions here. What are the best drills do you feel to enhance accuracy of passing?
To enhance the accuracy, what are the best drills? Well, listen, I think we covered a lot on that maybe tonight, Mickey. The best drills, it depends on what stage of development the children are at. If they're only starting off, then, you know, there's nothing wrong with starting on the ground, get them used to feeling the ball around their foot. It's a bit, you know, people talk about in the case of hurling, which would be your game, Mickey, that, you know, the hurl becomes an extension almost of the limb. So we want to get that feel for the ball. So I think initially drills, yes, drills have a place, but as soon as they have a fundamental grasp of how to kick the ball and how to go airborne, I would get them into semi-games, movement, those 5 stages of passing.
Yeah. Just the Colin McNally has a good coaching resource out there if people are looking at a resource. I'm sure it'll be online. It's a massive drills and games for developing football. So if you're interested in stuff like that, that's a good resource. Just at what age do you think kids begin to grasp the concept of kicking and running into space?
Well, I think it's different. Definitely, there is no exact route for it. Every player has their own development pathway. I think that age between 4 to 7, you want to be embedding the fundamental skills, but of course some quick learners will be picking up the sport specific skills, and they'll be starting to move and realise, appreciate the idea that the concept of movement and hitting the space in front of the players. So definitely for me, the wonderful opportunity there really for me is maybe from 7 right through to 12, where it really is the learning curve is at its steepest, providing they have a fair grasp of the fundamental ABCs and all of that.
Yeah, that question probably leads into this one, and you probably answered it already. Should children over 13 level know how to kick pass, and if not, why not? And as a part of that question, can skills as simple as kick come down to basically kicking the ball on the street, playing Gaelic football, or because children only get one night training?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I think children under 13 should, to be honest with you, I'm going to be, this is my experience. If they haven't a reasonable grasp of the sport-specific skills at 13, it's going to be a wee bit of struggle after that, I believe. It's the learning curve is starting to slow down a wee bit even then in terms of the technical skills, because people are starting to move on to other things, team play and all of that. I'm not saying it's too late. It's never too late. But by all means, the answer to that question is yes, they should be able to go airborne before the age of 13. And if you can catch their imagination and they fall in love with the game, and you're that type of coach that can make that happen, they will practice on their own. They will practice morning, night and day. And it's up to us as coaches to sell the love of the sport a bit as well.
Yeah. So a more technical one here. Do you ever spend time breaking down the kicking mechanics with groups of players, or would you do it on a one-to-one basis? And I suppose that's probably you've answered that in terms of age groups. Depends what age group you're working with.
Personally, other people may do it. Personally, I wouldn't do it in groups. I would let the group. I would have 2 coaches ideally at a training session at that youth level or children level. I'd have one keeping the tempo of the session going, where people getting lots of enjoyment, lots of games, lots of positive outcomes. But I would also have a coach there, maybe a spot and fix coach, who might from time to time take players out and in of that session to help them with a particular issue maybe that they're having.
Yeah, I think maybe during the presentation you answered this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway just to reiterate it. What do you believe is the best type of kick pass to receive the ball?
I believe that the best type of kick pass to receive the ball is possibly that one that we talked about in the cushioned inside of the boot pass. Now, it depends on the situation, Mickey. It depends on what space. Like, if the game was played like it was 20 years ago, when you're playing with maybe 2 people up front and there's no blanket defence in, by all means, that lovely punt pass, which can also be put into space, definitely. But whether we like it or not, the game has changed. Pockets of space are at a premium, and to find those pockets of space, I think that inside of the foot cushion pass is the pass of choice at the moment.
Just 1 or 2 observations. This I thought is pretty good. For all kicks, somebody mentioned for all kicks, think of the ball as a clock face, with a kick aimed at the centre, which would be the sweet spot, which will send the ball without any deviation. So that's probably linking around the punt kick.
Yes.
Whereas the swerve kick is probably kicking across the clock face from 3 to 9 o'clock for right-footed players, and probably vice versa for left-footed players. It's just an observation somebody had put into the Q&A.
That must have been Terence McWilliams for that, and because that is a very good point. But Terence used to talk about the clock face. He's absolutely right, and that does help players to. It helps coaches to coach.
Yeah.
There's you need to know your players as well, Mickey. Like, if you start to talk about that sort of stuff to some players, they'll have a brain freeze. But some other players might love that. So I think there's an element in it all of knowing your players as well.
Depends how they learn too, whether they see the picture, whether they don't.
Exactly, absolutely.
One other observation, maybe it's a question as well. Why do most right-footed players kick to the right of the post and vice versa for left-footed players? Is there a way we can crack this? Is that due to balance or their stance or when they're kicking the ball?
Well, it could be due with a lot of things, but I think like any flaw or any defect, I think if you look closely at it, you're bound to be able to find the ingredient or the coaching point that's letting them down there. And it's bound to be, it's like, I'm starting to play golf this way. I never played golf in my life before, and I'm doing the same thing. And it's not easy to correct that, but I think it makes sense. And if you're going to one side of the foot, it's something to do with your finishing stance or your stance when you're kicking that ball, and that should be able to be changed.
I suppose the way technology is now, it's worthwhile maybe videoing people who are having problematic things. I know in hurling we would do it, and you can break down the technical points very, very easily with slow-mo and all. So I think we're
absolutely. The technology out there at the minute, and even that stuff that you were doing in slow-mo, those videos that you sent us through, absolutely brilliant. And I would make that point, actually, that there's only so much coaches can do. See parents in the backyard, and there's so much that parents can do out in the garden with their kids like that, and have a bit of, make it fun. Don't make it like a lesson plan or whatever, but make it fun, and maybe do a wee bit of video and just make it a bit of crack, without making it too serious. By all means, yeah.
Keep the fun element there. So I'm gonna one more question for you, and I'll finish with this one. You should be able to answer this one, and the answer's probably very straightforward. What happened to the drop kick? Somebody was asking this earlier on.
My old coach used to call that a grubber kick, a drop kick. Well, the drop kick, the problem with the drop kick is there's probably too many things that can go wrong with a drop kick, because you're depending on the surface to come back up to you perfectly. You're leaving the ball open a wee bit longer for dispossession. You remember, I referred to Peter Canavan earlier, but Peter Canavan very seldom let the ball too far away from either his hands or his foot. He actually developed a solo, which actually was soloing the ball when it's still in his hands. So I'm a great believer in this, executing a skill with the least time from hand to foot. So there's just, to me, the drop kick, there's too many things can go awry. If it hits a bump in the ground, then it's not going to work, and a player can nip in and palm it away from you as well.
Yeah, I suppose the game has moved on and got a lot faster as well, so it doesn't really lend itself to the use
yes, the game. And that total mobility of when you're running at top speed, you have to slow a little bit to get the drop kick in potentially.
Yeah. I was going to finish. There's a lot more stuff has come in here in the last 5 minutes since you've been talking. I don't know where you want to finish, or you want to take another few questions?
Well, listen, yeah, take another couple if that's fine. Hopefully I can answer.
Let me see. Would you recommend splitting an age group into a variety of abilities, so early, intermediate, advanced, to teach skills differently?
Well, it depends. It depends on your club. It depends who you're working with. I certainly wouldn't do it in my club. Our club is a small club, and you wouldn't be able to do it for a start. I'm not a big believer in that, to be honest. I think players will learn better sometimes when they're working with better players, as long as the difference is not too big, and as long as the physicality is not too different. I would try and keep them together if at all possible. I don't ever like making fish of one and flesh of another, or sending out a signal that somehow some are better than others.
Yeah, there's an interesting one. Currently working with an adult ladies team. Would you recommend trying to bring their weaker foot into the game, considering they've played all their lives not using it? Personally, for me, and this is only my opinion, I probably wouldn't.
And I'll tell you, if you want to know why, because you have to think, everything you do now, you get 2 hours or 3 hours a week with players. And particularly this year was absolutely fantastic, in that the playing ratio was a lot greater to the training ratio because of the COVID thing, obviously, and all the rest. What are you going to gain? What are you going to get out of your 2 hours a week? What is the most that you can improve these players? And I don't think it's going to be going back to doing technical work with adults, to be honest with you. You might ask them to do some work on their own, or you might give them a program maybe that could improve that kicking ability. But I don't think you want to spend the 2 hours you have a week with adults in particularly doing all of that technical stuff. Is Mickey Moran going to be spending on a half an hour a week with Kilcoo doing kicking drills or perfecting the kicking? Probably not, but he's going to be trying to do it through games and other ways.
Yeah, and just some statements. Somebody agrees with the kick pass being inside of the foot, the best kick pass. This boy has a high success rate with his team, so he does, for control and accuracy especially. I've had kids who have been dropped by their club at under 12. Any advice on best bringing on their playing ability? There's an answer for the kicking one, kicking to the right and left, depending. Kicking the ball to the right of the post as a right-footed player is usually attributed to kicking too hard and leaning back. So there's an answer for somebody who wanted that.
Yeah.
The girls love the punt kick. That's really it. That's a lot of feedback during the presentation, Roger. So that's really everything now.
Just thanks for everybody who tuned in. And we're also always there, Tony and myself, and also Jay in general. The coaching and games are there to help people. That's what we're there for. If we can't do that, and we can't help, so the man in the concrete boots, or the guy that comes in the evening to take the under 8s or the under 6s, the under 10s, then I don't think we're doing our job.